The chandeliers of the Astoria Grand shimmered like frozen fireworks, scattering light over a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. It was the night of the CrossTech Charity Gala, an event so exclusive the invitations came engraved on gold plates. For everyone in attendance, it was the place to be seen. For one woman, it was the place to be invisible. Lydia Hale adjusted the silver tray in her hands, careful not to spill the champagne flutes that quivered like nervous glass birds. She moved between the elite with quiet precision, her soft sneakers squeaking once against the marble floor before she steadied her breath. No one noticed her. They never did. That was part of the job. Her dress was not part of the job. She shouldn't have worn it, but her uniform had torn that morning, and she had no backup. So she'd slipped into her grandmother's old lilac gown, a hand-stitched vintage piece from the 1952. Modest, but elegant. The satin had faded at the seams, and the pearls along the collar were slightly uneven. To Lydia, it was beautiful. It smelled faintly of lavender soap and old memories. Her grandmother, Margaret Hale, had always said, "You don't wear a dress to impress them, sweetheart. You wear it to remember who you are." Lydia clung to that tonight, because in a room like this, identity was currency, and she had none. The Billionaire host, Damian Cross, arrived late and loud. He was the kind of man who never entered a room, he conquered it. His laughter rolled across the ballroom like thunder that demanded applause. The cameras followed him, reporters orbiting like moths around a golden flame. CrossTech was worth billions, and Damian carried that weight like a crown. "Champagne, sir?" Lydia asked softly as he passed. He barely glanced at her. His eyes flicked to her gown, and a grin cut across his face, sharp, amused, cruel. "Sweetheart, that dress," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "is that from a Halloween costume or a museum exhibit?" The people around him laughed. Lydia froze, her face burning. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is she part of the theme?" Damian wasn't finished. "Tell me, did you steal that from your grandma's closet?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to melt into the marble floor. The tray trembled in her hands. One glass wobbled dangerously before she caught it. "It was my grandmother's," she said quietly. "Ah," he replied, smirking. "Then I stand corrected. It's vintage. I'm sure she was a real trendsetter, back when gas cost a dime." Laughter again. Lydia's chest ached. The pearls at her collar suddenly felt like shackles. From across the room, an elderly woman in a dark velvet gown watched the scene. Her expression was unreadable, something between anger and recognition. But Lydia didn't see her. She only saw the reflection of herself in the mirrored wall. A poor girl in an old dress surrounded by predators in silk. "Keep moving, Hale," her supervisor hissed under his breath as he passed. "You're not paid to talk." Lydia bit her lip, nodded, and walked away, her eyes stinging. Behind her, Damian raised his glass and toasted his own joke. The band struck up another jazzy tune, and the moment seemed to dissolve into glitter and laughter. But the sting remained. In the far corner, the elderly woman kept staring at Lydia's dress. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her glass of water. Her voice was barely a whisper, meant for no one but herself. "It can't be," she murmured. "That dress was lost 70 years ago." And with that single look, the past, long buried under diamonds and deceit, was about to rise again. The next morning, Lydia's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications exploded across her cracked screen tags, reposts, comments, a flood of strangers dissecting her humiliation. Someone had filmed the moment Damian Cross mocked her grandmother's dress. The clip had gone viral overnight. The headline read, "Billionaire roasts waitress's grandma dress at $10 Kelvins a plate gala." Lydia sat on the edge of her bed in her tiny Queen's apartment, staring at the video. The angle was perfect, catching every cruel smile, every ripple of laughter. The worst part wasn't what he said it was, how easily people joined in. The comments burned. "Why would she even wear that? Looks like a curtain. Girl, know your place." Classic Damian. Dude savage. She threw her phone face down, fighting the lump rising in her throat. Her grandmother's framed photo sat on the nightstand. The old woman's smile gentle, unbreakable, only made Lydia's heart hurt more. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "I didn't mean to turn your dress into a joke." By noon, her manager called. "Lydia, we have a problem," he said, his voice sharp. "Corporate saw the video. They say it's bad optics. You shouldn't have been filmed in a personal outfit." "You know I didn't ask for this," Lydia replied, gripping the phone. "Doesn't matter. You're suspended until further notice. Maybe longer." Click. Silence. Lydia stared at the peeling wallpaper of her apartment. Rent was due next week. Her bank account had $187.64. The humiliation she could handle, but losing her job, that was survival, bleeding out. Across Manhattan, Damian Cross was sitting in his penthouse, watching the same video. His assistant, Chloe, hovered nearby, tablet in hand. "It's trending on 3 platforms, sir," she said carefully. "Some people think it's funny, but a few are calling it bullying. There's a numbered dress girl thing now." Damian chuckled. "People need something to cry about. Let them." Public relations suggests a statement. He poured himself another espresso. "Here's the statement. Humor is not a crime." But even as he said it, his reflection caught him off guard. The smirk looked forced. Behind the bravado, there was a flicker, something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt? No, he told himself. Just fatigue. Back in Queens, Lydia opened her front door to find her neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, holding a grocery bag. "Sweetheart, I saw you on the news," the older woman said gently. "You were so brave to stand there." "Brave?" Lydia laughed bitterly. "I just stood there like an idiot." "Maybe," Mrs. Delgado said, setting the bag down. "But you didn't throw the tray in his face either. That's dignity, not stupidity." Lydia forced a smile, thanked her, and closed the door. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees. Her grandmother's words echoed in her head. "Grace costs nothing, but it's the finest silk you'll ever wear." She wasn't sure she believed that anymore. That night, as rain pattered against the window, Lydia scrolled through her messages again. Buried between the hate and mockery was one she hadn't noticed before. The sender's name was E. Marchand. It read, "Miss Hale, that dress you wore, where did you get it? Please contact me immediately. It's urgent." Lydia frowned. Marchand. That name sounded familiar. She typed back a short reply, hesitant. "It was my grandmother's." "Why?" The answer came a minute later. "Because it once belonged to me." Somewhere in the city, the woman who had watched from the gala's corner was preparing to uncover a secret that could ruin Damian Cross and rewrite Lydia's entire life. The Astoria Grand glittered again that evening, alive with another parade of wealth. To Lydia, it felt like walking back into a battlefield she hadn't agreed to fight on. But she needed her last paycheck, and management had agreed to let her pick it up in person. The lobby smelled of roses and champagne. She kept her eyes down as she walked through the marble halls, past women draped in couture and men who smelled like money and power. Every heel click and polite laugh echoed like judgment. She passed a framed photo of the night before Damian Cross shaking hands with donors under the headline, "A Triumph of Philanthropy." The sight of his grin twisted her stomach. At the reception desk, the event coordinator, a woman with perfect posture and colder eyes, handed her an envelope. "Sign here," she said. "That's it?" Lydia asked. "Company policy. You've been released from duty. Please exit through the staff corridor." Lydia's cheeks flushed, but she signed. She wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair it was. Instead, she nodded and walked toward the exit. The soft hum of the ballroom drew her attention. The doors stood slightly open, revealing a new gala tonight's crowd even richer than last night's. She paused, caught between anger and curiosity. The tables sparkled with crystal. The gowns shimmered like liquid gold. She whispered under her breath, "Grandma, I wish you could see this world. You'd hate it." Inside, Damian Cross stood at the center of it all again, charming investors, smiling for cameras. He looked untouchable, unbothered. Lydia's humiliation had become a joke for him, a punchline that brought him clicks and laughs. She turned to leave, but froze when she saw her. The older woman from last night, The one who had stared at her was walking through the crowd, moving slowly but with unmistakable purpose. Heads turned. Even Damian paused mid-sentence. "Who's that?" whispered a guest. "That's Elena Marchand," someone replied. "The designer. She practically invented New York couture in the 60s. Lydia's heart skipped. Marchand. The same name from the message. Elena was in her 80s, elegant in a simple black gown that needed no jewels to command attention. She approached Damian with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Cross," she said, her French accent smooth but firm. "I heard your company is preparing to relaunch my brand. Quite ambitious for someone with no taste." Laughter rippled nervously. Damian recovered quickly. "Mrs. Marchand, always a pleasure to see history walking among us." "History," she repeated, her gaze sharp. "Be careful. Some history can still speak." Lydia felt an invisible thread. Connect them. The message, the dress, the stare. Before she could stop herself, she stepped closer, staying hidden behind a marble pillar. Elena's eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting moment, they met Lydia's. Recognition flashed. The old woman's lips parted slightly, as if she'd just seen a ghost. "Excuse me, Mr. Cross," Elena said softly. "There's someone here I need to speak with." Damian raised an eyebrow. "A fan?" "No," she said. "A memory." Elena turned and walked toward the exit, her cane tapping rhythmically. Lydia hesitated, her pulse hammering in her throat. Then she followed. Outside, the night was cold and crisp, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Elena waited beneath the awning, her face illuminated by the gold glow of the marquee. "Miss Hale," she said quietly. "I hoped you would come." Lydia blinked. "How do you know my name?" "Because, my dear," Elena said, eyes glistening, "your grandmother once saved my life." And with that single sentence, the story of the old dress became something far deeper than fashion, a thread that would soon unravel an empire. Rain began to fall as Lydia stood under the Astoria's awning, her breath visible in the chill. Elena Marchand's driver held an umbrella, but the old woman waved him off. "Go wait by the car," she said, her voice still elegant, controlled. Then she turned back to Lydia, studying her face as if she were reading a long-forgotten letter. "You look so much like her," Elena whispered. "Like who?" Lydia asked, confused. "Margaret, your grandmother. The most beautiful girl I ever met, and the bravest." The name hit Lydia like a soft shock. She hadn't heard anyone outside her family say it aloud in years. "You knew her?" "I didn't just know her," Elena said. "We built everything together." Before she vanished, Elena gestured to her limousine. "Get in." There's too much to say for the sidewalk. Every instinct in Lydia screamed not to trust strangers, but something in Elena's eyes, grief, maybe disarmed her. She slid into the leather seat. The car smelled faintly of jasmine and old paper. As the city lights smeared across the windows, Elena began to speak. "In 1958, I was nobody. A poor girl from Marseille with a sewing machine and a dream. Margaret Hale walked into my studio one afternoon. She had fire in her eyes and a dress she'd stitched by hand. It was, how do you say, a miracle in fabric. I asked her to model it for me. That dress became the centerpiece of my first collection. The world thought I made it, but it was hers." Lydia's breath caught. "My grandmother made your first dress?" Elena nodded slowly. And then she disappeared. Just weeks before our debut show, she left behind nothing but that gown and a note that said, "Forgive me." Why would she leave? Elena hesitated, her eyes shadowed. "Because of a man. My business partner, Charles Cross." Lydia frowned. "Cross? Like Damian Cross?" "Yes," Elena said bitterly. "His grandfather. Charles was charming, brilliant, and ruthless. He wanted Margaret as his muse and more. When she refused, he made her life hell. I tried to protect her, but he had power, and I had only thread and needles." The limo stopped at a red light. Through the window, a giant billboard loomed. CrossTech Presents, the Marchand Heritage Collection. Damian's smirking face was front and center, holding a champagne flute. He's relaunching your brand, Lydia said quietly. Using your name. He bought it from my board while I was recovering from a stroke, Elena said. He calls it a tribute, but it's a theft. A legacy stolen by the same bloodline that ruined Margaret. Lydia stared out the window, her reflection ghost-like against the neon glow. Why are you telling me this? Elena reached into her handbag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a gold button shaped like a rose. This was part of the original gown. I kept it. And now that I see you, I know what it means. The dress you wore, it wasn't lost. It found its way home. Lydia held the button in her palm. It felt heavy, alive with history. Elena's tone softened. You have her courage, Miss Hale, but courage without direction is dangerous. Damian Cross is not just arrogant. He's about to erase everything your grandmother stood for. Lydia looked up. So what do we do? Elena smiled faintly, the kind that carried both sadness and steel. We remind him that some stories refuse to be rewritten. And as the limo pulled away into the rain-soaked city, Lydia realized she wasn't just fighting for her grandmother's memory. She was stepping straight into the Cross family's oldest secret. The next evening, Lydia stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, clutching the lilac dress that had started all of this. She'd pressed the wrinkles out by hand, smoothing the fabric the way her grandmother used to. The pearls gleamed faintly in the dim light. Elena's words still echoed in her mind. Some stories refuse to be rewritten. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Elena wanted Lydia to accompany her to CrossTech's annual shareholder banquet, where Damian Cross would announce the rebirth of the Marchand brand. She said the timing was perfect. Lydia wasn't so sure. You want me to walk into a room full of billionaires wearing the same dress that got me fired? Lydia had asked that afternoon. Yes, Elena replied, a spark in her eyes, because that dress belongs there more than they ever will. Now, standing alone, Lydia doubted every word, but when she closed her eyes, she could almost hear her grandmother's soft laughter. Grace costs nothing. She slipped into the gown. At the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the ballroom glowed like a universe of glass and gold. Reporters lined the red carpet, shouting questions at the arriving elite. Damian Cross appeared last, his arm around a model draped in emerald silk. Flashbulbs went off like fireworks. Inside, champagne flowed freely, and the stage was set with a massive screen displaying the new logo. Marchand X, CrossTech, Heritage Redefined. Lydia entered quietly through the side door with Elena at her side. The crowd barely noticed them at first, but whispers began. Heads turned. The lilac dress caught the light like a ghost walking through the past. Damian saw her halfway through his speech. His practiced grin faltered for just a second before he recovered. Ah, he said into the microphone, smiling tightly. It looks like history has come to visit us tonight. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Lydia froze mid-step. Elena squeezed her arm gently. Damian descended from the stage, his confidence radiating like poison. Miss Hale, wasn't it? I almost didn't recognize you without the tray. Lydia met his gaze. You recognize the dress, though, don't you? His jaw twitched. I recognize bad taste when I see it. You really thought wearing that again was a good idea. She wore it because it belongs to her, Elena said, stepping forward. And to me. The room hushed. Cameras pivoted. Damian blinked, his PR smile fading. Mrs. Marchand, what a surprise. I didn't realize you'd to endorse the collaboration. I didn't, Elena said. You're exploiting it. Reporters began whispering, recording every word. Damian's team motioned frantically, but he raised a hand, pretending calm. Mrs. Marchand, perhaps this isn't the time. This is exactly the time, Elena interrupted. This young woman's grandmother was the soul of my first collection. She designed that dress long before your family learned to profit from beauty. Damian's tone sharpened. And yet, without my family's investments, your name would be a footnote in a forgotten boutique. The audience gasped. Lydia stepped forward before Elena could respond. My grandmother didn't need investors to matter, she said, her voice steady. She just needed integrity, something your family seems to have misplaced. A murmur swept through the crowd. Damian's smirk hardened. You think you can stand here and lecture me? You're a waitress playing dress-up. The words hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. I'd rather wear my grandmother's truth, she said quietly, than your grandfather's lies. Oh, the cameras caught everything, the flicker of anger in his eyes, the trembling in his jaw, and in that electric silence, with the world watching, Lydia Hale unknowingly pulled the first thread that would unravel the entire CrossTech empire. The ballroom went silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears, heavy and charged. Damian Cross stood frozen, his jaw tight, his champagne glass trembling just enough for the cameras to catch it. Lydia didn't move. She didn't blink. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. Elena Marchand stepped beside her, proud but calm, her voice steady enough to slice through the tension. You see, Mr. Cross, she said, power can buy you a name, but it can't buy the story behind it. The Marchand legacy was built by hands like hers, hands your family tried to erase. Damian forced a laugh. Erase? Please. I'm reviving your brand. I'm doing you a favor. Elena tilted her head. A favor? Yes, he said, stepping closer, the smirk creeping back. People don't want to remember dusty old dresses and tragic stories. They want glamour. They want my name attached to yours. That's how history survives through relevance. Lydia took a breath, her fingers trembling around the edge of her clutch. She could feel every camera lens turning toward her, waiting for her to crumble. But instead, she looked him in the eye and spoke the words that would break him. My grandmother's name was Margaret Hale, she said slowly. And your grandfather ruined her life. The sentence hit the room like thunder. Gasps erupted. Damian's smirk vanished, his face drained of color. What did you just say? He whispered. She worked for Charles Cross, Lydia continued. She designed the dress you mocked. She trusted him, and he destroyed her. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph, holding it up for the reporters. This is Margaret Hale, she said, the original designer of the Marchand collection before Charles Cross stole her work and her future. Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters shouted questions. Damian's PR team scrambled toward the stage, but it was too late. The story was out. Damian turned to Lydia, his voice low. Dangerous. You think you can prove that? You're just a waitress with a sad story. Nobody's going to believe you. Lydia's pulse pounded, but she didn't back down. Then why are you shaking? His hand tightened around the champagne glass until it cracked, spilling gold liquid across his sleeve. His girlfriend touched his arm, whispering, Damian, let's just go. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Security, he snapped finally. Get them out. Two men in suits stepped forward, but before they could reach her, Elena raised her voice. Touch her, and I'll make sure every news outlet in this room knows exactly why you're afraid. The guards froze. The crowd was buzzing now, half scandalized, half thrilled. The perfect society storm. Lydia glanced toward the cameras. Her voice shook only once before steadying. My grandmother wasn't a ghost. She was an artist. And tonight, everyone will finally remember her name. Applause broke out from one side of the room, hesitant at first, then growing. The noise built until it swallowed Damian's fury. He stood there, cornered, the king stripped of his crown in front of his own court. Elena leaned toward him, her voice just loud enough for the nearest cameras to catch. You should have respected the dress, Mr. Cross. You mocked a memory that doesn't die quietly. Damian's breathing quickened. He tried to speak, but no words came. The microphones caught only silence, and the sound of his empire cracking. And as Lydia and Elena walked out of the ballroom together, the crowd parting before them, no one realized that one simple sentence had just started a war that would burn through generations of lies. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Waitress exposes billionaire at live gala. The forgotten designer behind the Marchand legacy. Damian Cross faces. Scandal tied to family fraud. Lydia sat on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, the lilac dress draped beside her like a sleeping ghost. Every major outlet replayed the footage, the confrontation, Damian's meltdown, Elena's revelation. It was surreal, watching her own trembling voice on national television. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages flooded in, some cruel, some kind, and some from strangers who called her the bravest woman on the internet. One stood out. "We need to talk. I'm from the New York Herald's legal desk. You may have grounds to challenge the CrossTech ownership of the Marchand designs." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Across the city, inside a penthouse office wrapped in glass, Damian Cross wasn't sleeping. His boardroom was in chaos. Lawyers shouted over each other. Stock tickers bled red. "You need to make a statement," one advisor urged. Damian slammed his hand on the table. "A statement won't fix this. She called my family thieves on live television." "Because they were," another voice muttered under his breath. Damian glared at him. "What did you say?" The man looked away. No one defended him. The fear that once surrounded Damian had thinned into something fragile. He could feel it, the power slipping through his fingers like sand. By noon, CrossTech's merger announcement was cancelled. Reporters camped outside his building. Someone had unearthed old letters between Charles Cross and Elena Marchand, confirming the truth. The original Marchand collection was stolen. The evidence was undeniable. Meanwhile, Elena invited Lydia to her townhouse again. The rooms were filled with sunlight and the faint scent of roses. On a mannequin stood the restored version of the lilac gown, gleaming as if it had waited decades for this moment. Elena smiled softly. "The world knows now. But what happens next must come from you." Lydia hesitated. "I don't know if I'm the right person. I'm just a waitress." Elena shook her head. "No. You're the reason the truth survived. That makes you the right person by default." She handed Lydia a slim folder. Inside were legal documents, the original sketches, patent records, and a handwritten note from Margaret Hale herself. "To Elena, may this dress carry both our names, always." Lydia's eyes blurred with tears. She wanted both names on it. "Yes," Elena said. "And now that wish can finally come true." Days later, a press conference was held, not at the Astoria or the Metropolitan, but at a small studio in Queens, the kind of place where dreams are sown, not sold. Lydia stood behind a wooden podium wearing the lilac dress once more. Elena sat proudly beside her. "Good evening," Lydia began, her voice steady despite the camera's flashing. "My grandmother, Margaret Hale, was the true designer behind the first Marchand collection. For decades, her work was hidden, her name erased. But today, we're reclaiming it not out of revenge, but out of respect." She paused, looking straight into the lens. "To every person who's ever been laughed at for not fitting in, for not having the right clothes, the right name, or the right connections, you don't need their approval to be valuable. You just need your truth." The crowd applauded. Reporters nodded. Later that night, as Lydia walked home, she passed a newsstand. The newest headline made her stop. CrossTech CEO steps down amid scandal. For the first time, she smiled, not out of triumph, but relief. She whispered into the cool night air, "We did it, Grandma." And under the flicker of the city lights, the girl who had once been mocked for her grandmother's dress finally stood taller than the empire that tried to bury it. It had been 2 weeks since the press conference, but Lydia's life hadn't returned to normal. Nothing about it ever would. Some people called her a hero. Others said she'd ruined a powerful man's career for attention. Every time she opened social media, there were arguments in the comments. Some praised her bravery. Others called her a liar. Her landlord, who had barely looked at her before, now smiled too much when collecting rent. Reporters occasionally waited outside her apartment, hoping for a new soundbite. She had become a symbol, and that was the strangest part. She didn't feel like a symbol. She still woke up in the same small bed, made instant coffee, and worried about bills. But her world was changing faster than she could breathe. Elena tried to guide her through it. "Fame burns quickly, my dear," she warned one afternoon as they sat in the studio. "What lasts is purpose. You must decide what to do with this voice the world has given you." "I never wanted a voice," Lydia said. "I just wanted to keep my job and honor my grandma." Elena smiled sadly. "And yet, history rarely asks for permission." That day, A letter arrived at the studio. It bore the CrossTech logo embossed in gold. Lydia's heart sank as she unfolded it. It was from Damian Cross. Miss Hale, I owe you an apology. Not a public one. I've done enough damage in public. I can't undo what my family did, but I want to make something right. I'm stepping down from CrossTech. The Marchand name is yours, and Mrs. Marchand's. To carry forward, I only ask to meet once, privately. There are things you don't know. D. Cross. Lydia read it 3 times. Don't go, Elena said instantly. Men like him never meet without reason. He will want something. I think I need to, Lydia replied. If this is how the story ends, I need to look him in the eye. The meeting was set for the following evening, at the rooftop bar of a quiet downtown hotel. When Lydia arrived, Damian was already there, alone, without bodyguards or press. He looked smaller somehow, not the booming figure from the gala, but a man stripped of armor. Miss Hale, he said softly. You look peaceful. I didn't come for flattery, she said, sitting across from him. He nodded. Fair. You deserve the truth. My grandfather, Charles Cross, didn't just steal your grandmother's work. He built our entire fortune on it. Every expansion, every acquisition, it all started with that theft. Lydia said nothing, letting him speak. Damian's eyes drifted toward the city skyline. I grew up idolizing him. I thought he was the definition of power, but now I realize he was just afraid. Afraid of being forgotten. That's what arrogance really is. Fear, dressed up as confidence. He looked back at her. You made me see that. Lydia studied him for a long moment. Then learn from it. Do something with the power you have left. I already did, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. A donation to fund scholarships for women in fashion and design under the name Margaret Hale Foundation. Her throat tightened. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said, because dignity costs more than anything I've ever bought. They sat in silence, the city humming below them. For the first time, there was no hatred between them, just understanding, fragile, but real. When Lydia left that night, the wind tugged at her hair, and the lights of New York shimmered like scattered pearls. For the first time, the weight of her grandmother's dress no longer felt like a burden. It felt like wings. The following month unfolded like a dream Lydia never knew she had permission to live. The Margaret Hale Foundation launched quietly at first, a small non-profit with Elena's guidance and Damian's discreet financial backing. Its mission was simple but powerful: to support women in fashion who came from nothing, just like her grandmother once had. Within weeks, applications poured in from across the country. Lydia spent her days sorting through letters written in shaky handwriting, filled with stories that mirrored her own waitresses, seamstresses, single mothers, students sewing on borrowed machines. Each one felt like a thread connecting her to something bigger. You realize this is your grandmother's legacy now, Elena told her one morning over tea. You're building what she never got to finish. Lydia smiled faintly. She built it. I'm just trying not to drop the needle. Elena chuckled softly. That humility is exactly what keeps it strong. In the weeks that followed, the foundation caught the media's attention again, but this time, for all the right reasons. Articles shifted from scandal to inspiration. Headlines read, "From waitress to founder, the woman who reclaimed a legacy." For the first time, Lydia didn't feel like she was defending her grandmother's name. She was expanding it. But success brought new pressures. Designers wanted partnerships. Fashion houses offered her contracts. Even CrossTech's new interim CEO requested a meeting to discuss collaborations. Elena warned her, "Be careful. The wolves will wear silk this time." That night, Lydia sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through old photos. One showed her as a little girl standing on a chair beside her grandmother, both laughing as they tried to sew a crooked hem. Margaret's wrinkled hands guided hers gently. "Never sew in anger," Grandma had said. "Stitches made in peace last longer." Lydia smiled through the ache in her chest. "You were right again," she whispered. The next day, an email arrived from an unknown sender. The subject line read, The dress deserves its home. Attached was a message from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. They wanted to exhibit her grandmother's original gown, the lilac dress that started it all. When Lydia told Elena, the old woman gasped. "It's poetic," she said. "After all these years, the dress will stand among the greats." They agreed to restore it one final time for the exhibit. Over several late nights, Lydia worked in Elena's studio, hand-stitching loose seams, replacing a missing pearl, pressing the fabric until it gleamed again under soft light. Each motion felt sacred. On the day of the unveiling, the museum was filled with reporters, designers, and students. The lilac gown stood in a glass case at the center of the hall, timeless, elegant, untouchable. Lydia stepped up to the microphone, her palms sweating slightly. "This dress was made by my grandmother, Margaret Hale, in a small apartment, with nothing but thread, patience, and hope. It survived laughter, loss, and greed, but it also survived love. And that's what fashion really is. It's not about the fabric, it's about what lives inside it." As she spoke, Elena wiped away tears. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, Damian stood quietly, unnoticed, a faint, bittersweet smile crossing his face. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Lydia stood alone before the glass case. Her reflection merged with the gown's shimmering surface. She whispered, "You made it home, Grandma." And for the first time in 70 years, the dress that had once been mocked as worthless stood under museum lights, glowing like a piece of history proof that grace can outlast cruelty, and truth always finds its way into the light. The exhibit became a phenomenon. People came from all over the country just to see the dress. It wasn't the most extravagant piece in the museum, nor the rarest, but it had something none of the others did, a story that made people stop and breathe. Each visitor saw something different in the soft lilac folds. Some saw a symbol of resilience. Others saw redemption. Lydia saw her grandmother's hands. She started volunteering at the museum on weekends, quietly answering questions and sharing the history of the gown. The curators loved her authenticity. "You don't sound rehearsed," one said. "That's because it's not a story," Lydia replied. "It's a life." One evening, after closing hours, she lingered in the empty hall, staring at the display. The lights dimmed to a warm gold. The glass around the dress reflected her face, older, wiser, and calmer than the girl who once hid from cameras. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's story?" she murmured to the reflection. Elena's voice answered behind her, "No, my dear, you're just continuing it." The older woman approached slowly, her cane tapping the marble floor. "Your grandmother would be proud, not because her dress is in a museum, but because her granddaughter learned that dignity can survive anything." Lydia smiled. "You always know what to say." Elena chuckled softly. "Age is only useful if you collect wisdom along the way." They walked side by side through the quiet corridors, passing centuries of art. Lydia paused by a glass case displaying sketches from Elena's early career drawings that Margaret had once helped bring to life. "You know," Lydia said, "I used to think my grandmother's world was so far away from mine. Different time, different people. But now I see it's all the same fight, just with prettier lighting." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Power changes its costume, but it's always the same play." A week later, the museum announced something unexpected. They wanted to make the exhibit permanent, calling it Grace in Thread, the legacy of Margaret Hale. The news spread like wildfire. Interviews, magazines, talk shows, all wanted a piece of Lydia. At first, she agreed to a few, thinking it might help the foundation. But soon, the same media that once mocked her began twisting her words, packaging her into a narrative of the poor waitress who beat the billionaire. She hated it. That wasn't the story she wanted told. One night, while scrolling through another article that reduced everything to scandal, she slammed her phone down. "They don't get it," she muttered. Elena, who was knitting by the window, didn't look up. "Then tell it yourself." "What do you mean?" "Write her story. Your grandmother's story. Yours. The truth without headlines. Let people see the woman behind the glass, not the myth in the spotlight." The idea stuck. Lydia spent the next few nights writing longhand in a spiral notebook, the smell of tea and old paper filling the room. She wrote about Margaret's courage, about Elena's loyalty, about the humiliation and the fight that followed. And most of all, she wrote about the dress, the symbol that carried their lives through generations. When she finally finished, she handed the pages to Elena. "It's not perfect," she said. Elena smiled. Neither was the dress. That's what made it human. And as Lydia watched the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and lilac, she realized her grandmother's story was no longer trapped in fabric. It was alive in every person who chose grace over greed. Winter crept into the city like a whisper. Snow dusted the streets outside Lydia's apartment, and for once, life felt still. But inside her, something was stirring a need to know everything. Her grandmother's name was finally celebrated, but pieces of the past still felt missing. The more she learned, the more questions bloomed. What had really happened the night Margaret Hale disappeared? What had she been running from? Lydia spent hours poring through the archive. Elena had kept letters, sketches, business ledgers yellowed with age. Most were harmless relics of a bygone era, until she found one envelope tucked behind a faded photograph. It was postmarked 1960. The handwriting was her grandmother's. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means I never came back. I'm sorry. They know. Charles won't stop. Protect the dress it carries. Proof of everything." Lydia froze. Proof of what? She raced to the museum that same evening, her heart pounding against the cold. The security guard recognized her immediately and let her in. The exhibit was empty, quiet except for the hum of the heating system. The lilac gown glowed softly under its glass dome. She whispered to herself, "What were you hiding, Grandma?" Her eyes scanned every seam, every pearl. Then she remembered Elena, once saying Margaret was a perfectionist with secret habits like sewing her initials inside the hem. Lydia lifted the glass carefully with the guard's help and examined the bottom lining. There, just under the last row of stitches, she saw it, a faint bump in the fabric. Her fingers trembled as she pulled at the thread. A small folded piece of parchment slid out. Inside was a photograph, black and white, creased and fragile. It showed her grandmother standing beside Charles Cross. But what made Lydia gasp was the document visible in his hand, a contract bearing two signatures, Margaret Hale and Charles Cross. Across it, in bold red ink, were the words, "Property of Marchand Atelier," a stolen contract, the proof her grandmother had mentioned. The security guard stared wide-eyed. "Miss Hale, that looks big." "It's everything," she whispered. "It proves he took her designs and claimed them for himself." "Oh." She called Elena immediately. The old woman's voice cracked with disbelief. After all these years, she still found a way to tell the truth. The next morning, the museum buzzed like a hive. Legal experts confirmed the document's authenticity. It linked the Cross family's first fortune directly to Margaret's stolen work. By noon, every major news outlet was reporting it. Lost document confirms fashion's greatest theft. When Damian Cross saw the broadcast, he didn't get angry this time. He just sat in silence. The truth had finished what humiliation began. That evening, Lydia and Elena stood side by side at the museum again. The crowd was smaller this time, mostly journalists and historians, but the energy was electric. Elena squeezed Lydia's hand. "You did what even your grandmother couldn't. You freed her." Lydia's eyes glistened. "No, she freed herself. She just needed me to lift the glass." They watched as the curator placed the hidden letter and the recovered photo next to the gown, encased forever. "This," Elena said softly, "is what justice looks like. It's quiet, but it shines." Lydia smiled, wiping a tear. And as the lights dimmed and the lilac dress glowed softly behind the glass, the ghosts that once haunted the Marchand legacy finally rested, stitched into history by truth, not tragedy. The revelation spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, the Cross family name was everywhere, not on billboards or gala invitations, but across headlines that screamed, "Fashion empire built on stolen designs." Investors fled. CrossTech stock plunged. Damian's face, once a symbol of charisma and control, now carried the look of a man cornered by ghosts. Inside his penthouse, he sat in the dark, phone buzzing non-stop. Messages from the board, legal teams, old allies, most of them demanding distance, a few offering pity. He ignored them all. When the television blared another segment about the rediscovered contract, he finally snapped. He hurled the remote across the room, shattering the screen. But silence only made the memories louder. He could still hear his grandfather's voice, cold and commanding. Power doesn't come from honesty, boy. It comes from what people believe you own. For years, Damian had believed that. He'd lived it. Now that empire of belief was collapsing around him. Across the city, Lydia watched the same news coverage, sitting beside Elena in the studio. Neither spoke. The proof was undeniable. The photo, the contract, the handwriting analysis. Justice had arrived, but it didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy, like standing over a battlefield littered with victories and regrets. Elena broke the silence first. Do you think he knew? Damian, I mean? Lydia nodded slowly. He didn't know the whole story, but he didn't care to ask either. Elena sighed. Most men who inherit power never do. That evening, Lydia received another email from Damian, short, almost desperate. I need to see you, not for forgiveness, for closure. Elena frowned when Lydia told her. He's drowning. Don't get pulled under with him. I won't, Lydia promised. But maybe he needs to hear the truth from someone who won't lie to him. They met at the museum after hours. The halls were empty, silent except for the low hum of the air vents. Damian stood before the dress, the same place where his downfall had begun. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. The suit was gone, replaced by a plain coat and tired eyes. So this is it, he said quietly. The masterpiece that destroyed me. It didn't destroy you, Lydia replied. It exposed you. He turned to her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Do you think I'm like him? My grandfather? She studied him for a long moment. You were, but you don't have to be, he exhaled shakily. Do you know what's strange? When I mocked you that night, I thought I was untouchable. But when you said her name, your grandmother's name, I felt something crack, like I'd been carrying a lie that finally ran out of room inside me. Lydia's voice softened. Then stop carrying it. Oh. He nodded, his throat tightening. I'm leaving the city, selling the penthouse. What's left of the company will be restructured under a new board. No more Cross legacy. She wasn't sure what to say. There was a part of her that wanted to hate him forever, but another that saw the hollow boy inside the broken man. Do one more thing, she said. Tell the truth publicly. Not for you, for her. He gave a small, weary smile. I will. Days later, Damian appeared on live television. No lawyers, no PR filters, just him. He confessed everything, his family's theft, his arrogance, his downfall. Lydia watched from the studio. When the broadcast ended, she whispered to the lilac gown, It's over. And for the first time, the ghosts that once ruled both families were gone, swept away by a storm that left only honesty standing. Weeks passed, and the scandal that once dominated every screen began to fade. People moved on, as they always do, chasing the next story. But for Lydia, the echoes remained. One morning, she woke to find a thick envelope at her door. The return address read, CrossTech Legal Division. Her chest tightened as she opened it. Inside was a single letter, formal, yet strangely personal. Miss Hale, following Mr. Cross's resignation, the remaining board has voted unanimously to transfer all rights of the Marchand archives and related designs to you and Mrs. Elena Marchand. These materials will now be legally recognized under the Hale Marchand Foundation. Consider this, the final act of restitution. It was signed by Damian himself. Lydia sat down slowly, reading it again and again. The words didn't feel real. She was holding a piece of history, one her grandmother had bled for, one Elena had protected through decades of silence. When she told Elena, the old woman's hand trembled as she reached for the letter. He did it, she whispered. He finally broke the chain. Lydia smiled softly. No, Grandma did. We just finished what she started. That afternoon, they met with the museum's curator to discuss moving the archives. The curator, a bespectacled woman named Dr. Monroe, spoke reverently as she handled the old sketches and notes. "These aren't just fashion designs," she said. "They're a record of survival, the way women created beauty in a world that tried to silence them." Elena looked at Lydia. "You see why this matters now?" Lydia nodded. "It's not about fame or revenge. It's about memory." Still, beneath the peace, Lydia couldn't shake a lingering unease. Every victory came with a price. The press had begun calling her the heiress of integrity, a title she hated. She wasn't an heiress. She was a waitress who happened to tell the truth. That night, she went for a walk through Central Park. Snow fell lightly, the world hushed and calm. She passed couples holding hands, street musicians packing up, children tossing snowballs under lamplight. The city felt alive again, unburdened. She sat on a bench and whispered into the cold air. "What now, Grandma? What do I do with a name that suddenly matters?" A quiet voice answered behind her. "You keep it humble." She turned. It was Damian. He looked different, grounded somehow, carrying no entourage, no arrogance. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. "I come here when I can't sleep," he replied. "It's quieter than guilt." Lydia smirked faintly. "You sound almost human now." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's the first honest thing anyone said about me in years." They sat in silence for a moment, snowflakes gathering on the bench between them. "You know," Damian said, "people think legacy is something you build, but sometimes it's what you give away." Lydia glanced at him. "Then I guess you're finally learning from your grandfather's mistakes." "Trying to," he said. "I sold the last of my shares today. I'm leaving the country. No more empire. No more pretending." She studied him quietly. "Where will you go?" "Doesn't matter. Maybe somewhere no one knows the name Cross." Lydia looked up at the falling snow. "That's the funny thing about names. They can curse you or save you. Depends on what you do with them." He nodded, stood, and offered a small, almost shy smile. "Take care, Miss Hale. You too, Mr. Cross." And as he disappeared into the snowy park, Lydia realized the true weight of her grandmother's name wasn't in what it carried. It was in how it taught her to stand tall, even when the world tried to make her small. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came something Lydia hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. The city was thawing, the trees outside her apartment blooming pale pink. But beneath that beauty, she was working harder than ever. The Elena Marchand Foundation had outgrown its small office space. Fashion schools from across the country reached out to collaborate. Lydia had become a reluctant figurehead, giving speeches about creativity, honesty, and resilience. One morning, Elena walked into the studio holding a stack of invitations. "They want you to host this year's Fashion Restoration Gala," she said, setting them down. Lydia blinked. "Me? The same event where Damian mocked me in front of the world?" "Exactly the same," Elena replied with a wry smile. "Life has an interesting sense of symmetry." Lydia laughed softly but shook her head. "I don't belong on that stage, Elena. That's not who I am." Elena leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Then who are you, my dear? A waitress who stumbled into history? Or a woman who turned humiliation into heritage?" The question lingered in the air. 2 weeks later, Lydia stood backstage at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the same ballroom where her nightmare had begun. The chandeliers glittered again. The crowd sparkled in designer gowns. But the energy was different, hopeful, curious, even reverent. As she adjusted the microphone, a stagehand whispered, "You nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But I've been terrified before. I survived that too." The host's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's keynote speaker, Miss Lydia Hale." Applause filled the room. Lydia stepped out under the lights. For a moment, she froze, remembering that night, Damian's laughter, the mocking stares, the sound of breaking glass. But then she saw Elena in the front row, nodding, smiling. Lydia took a breath. 2 years ago, I walked into this room wearing a dress that everyone laughed at. I was serving champagne, not making speeches, and I thought my grandmother's legacy ended the night she was forgotten. But I was wrong. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. She taught me that dignity isn't something you can buy or fake. It's something you carry, even when people try to take it from you. That night, someone called my grandmother's dress a relic. Tonight, it's history. Applause rose again, louder this time. Lydia smiled, feeling her nerves dissolve. Fashion, she continued, isn't about perfection. It's about memory. Every stitch, every flaw, every story sewn into a piece of fabric, it's all a record of who we are. My grandmother didn't have fame or fortune, but she had grace, and somehow that outlived every empire built to erase her. The audience stood. Cameras flashed. In the crowd, Lydia spotted a familiar figure standing quietly near the exit, Damian Cross. He wasn't dressed in a suit, just a simple black coat. He didn't wave or approach, but when their eyes met, he nodded once silent acknowledgement, not apology. Later that night, after the gala ended, Lydia found a small white envelope tucked among the flowers on her table. Inside was a short, handwritten note. Your grandmother would have loved your speech. Thank you for giving her the ending she deserved. D. She smiled faintly and looked toward the city skyline, glowing beyond the windows. The ballroom lights reflected in the glass like stars. Elena joined her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You see, she said, you didn't just return to the stage. You reclaimed it. And as the crowd's laughter echoed softly behind her, Lydia realized that the same room that once broke her had now become the place where she and her grandmother's name finally stood unshakable. A month after the gala, Lydia received an invitation from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The subject line simply read, "A proposal for legacy." When she arrived, the curator, Dr. Monroe, greeted her warmly. "Lydia," she said, "we're planning a special exhibit next spring, not just about fashion history, but about the women who changed it. We want the centerpiece to be your grandmother's dress. But this time," she added, smiling, "we want it to live again." "Live again?" Lydia asked, confused. "We'd like to recreate it. Bring it back to life on the runway." One last showing. For a moment, Lydia couldn't speak. The idea was beautiful, terrifying, and sacred all at once. "You mean someone's going to wear it?" "Yes," Dr. Monroe said softly. "But not just someone. You." Lydia laughed out of disbelief. "Me? I'm not a model." "You're not supposed to be," the curator replied. "You're the story." The decision haunted her for days. Elena encouraged her, of course. "It's poetic," she said. "You'll close the circle. Your grandmother designed it, you preserved it, and now you'll wear it." "But what if I ruin it?" Lydia whispered. Elena touched her hand gently. "You can't ruin what already survived everything." Weeks passed, and rehearsals began. Designers and historians worked side by side, meticulously replicating every detail of the lilac gown. The uneven pearls, the tiny stitches, the faint shimmer along the hem. They refused to modernize it. It would remain exactly as Margaret Hale made it, imperfections and all. The night of the show arrived in late April. The event was intimate. No flashing paparazzi, just an audience of artists, students, and people who understood the weight of craft. The air smelled faintly of lilies and silk. Backstage, Lydia stood before a mirror, wearing the recreated gown. For a second, she saw not her reflection, but her grandmother's face, overlaying hers soft smile, determined eyes. She whispered, "I hope I do you proud." Elena, now frailer but radiant in her black velvet shawl, squeezed her hand. "You already have." When Lydia stepped onto the runway, the room fell silent. The lights dimmed to a golden hue. The orchestra began to play a slow, haunting melody. Every step she took felt like walking through time, each movement a heartbeat echoing across generations. People didn't cheer. They didn't clap at first. They just watched. It wasn't fashion. It was resurrection. At the end of the runway, Lydia paused, turned, and met the crowd's eyes. She saw tears, smiles, and awe. For the first time, She realized the power her grandmother's work still carried, not just as art, but as proof that grace outlasts cruelty. When she returned backstage, Elena was crying quietly. "She's here," she whispered. "I can feel her." Lydia hugged her tightly, careful not to wrinkle the gown. Then maybe she finally knows her story ended where it should have. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Lydia returned alone to the runway. She stood in silence, the dress shimmering faintly in the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. She whispered, "You breathed again tonight, Grandma. You really did." Oh, and as the echo of the music faded into the empty hall, the lilac gown once laughed at, then hidden, then exalted, had finally fulfilled its purpose, not to be worn by the rich, but to remind the world that true beauty is never forgotten. It's simply waiting for the courage to return. After the fashion show, life didn't return to normal, it found a new rhythm. The Hale Marchand Foundation gained international recognition, and museums requested traveling exhibits of the gown. Lydia was invited to lecture at art schools, and journalists called her the quiet revolution in silk. But even as success surrounded her, a strange restlessness crept in. Something about her grandmother's story still felt unfinished, as if one last thread remained untied. One rainy afternoon, Lydia returned to her grandmother's old house in Queens. The building had been sold years ago, but the current owner, a kind, elderly man who had followed her story in the papers, agreed to let her look around. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of cedar and dust hit her like a memory. She could almost hear her grandmother humming in the kitchen, the soft clatter of a sewing machine upstairs. The man handed her a flashlight. "Be careful up there. The attic hasn't been touched in decades." Lydia climbed the narrow staircase, her heart pounding. The wooden boards creaked under her feet. Dust floated like ghosts in the beam of light. Boxes and old trunks filled the space, labeled in her grandmother's looping handwriting: winter fabrics, sketches, old patterns. She opened one trunk and froze. Inside was her grandmother's sewing kit, perfectly preserved. A thimble, a silver scissor, faded spools of thread, and beneath them, a sealed envelope with her name written in elegant cursive: "For my Liddy, when truth finds you." Her hands shook as she opened it. "My dearest Liddy, if you found this, then the truth has caught up with time. There are things I never had the courage to tell your mother, and maybe I was wrong for keeping them. I wasn't just a designer. I was in love with Charles Cross. He promised to help me build a name, but when I refused to let him take credit, he turned on me. I ran, not because I was afraid of losing my work, but because I was carrying something more precious. Your mother." Lydia stopped reading, her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the words again, barely believing them. "I thought if I disappeared, the scandal would die, and your mother would have a chance to live without the Cross shadow. I never knew it would find her anyway. But if you're reading this, then maybe love and truth have both survived me." The letter ended with shaky ink. "Don't hate him. Hate turns beauty into dust. Stitch love into everything you touch." Tears slipped down Lydia's cheeks. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her heart. That evening, she went to Elena's townhouse and read the letter aloud. When she finished, the older woman sat silently for a long moment, her eyes glistening. "So, that's why she vanished," Elena whispered. "She wasn't just running from betrayal. She was protecting her child." Lydia nodded slowly. "It means Damian and I. We share more than a story of conflict. We share blood." Elena looked at her with quiet understanding. "Then perhaps that's why fate kept pulling you two into the same storm." The room fell into thoughtful silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, soft and distant. Lydia glanced at the letter again. She said not to hate him. "Maybe it's time I finally listen." Elena smiled faintly. "Then finish what she started, my dear. Not with anger, but with grace." And as rain pattered against the window, Lydia realized her grandmother's final secret wasn't about shame, it was about forgiveness. The dress had carried truth, but the letter had carried peace. Lydia couldn't sleep that night. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her chest. She kept seeing the words from her grandmother's letter: I was in love with Charles Cross. The truth twisted everything she thought she knew. Her grandmother hadn't just been betrayed by the Cross family, she had loved one of them. And her mother, long gone now, had been born from that secret. Which meant that Lydia and Damian Cross weren't just linked by fate or history, they shared blood. She sat by the window as dawn broke, the city pale and quiet. A strange peace settled in her, a kind she didn't understand yet. The hate she once carried for Damian felt smaller now, swallowed by the enormity of what her grandmother had endured. Later that morning, she went to Elena's studio. The old woman was sketching a new pattern, her thin hand steady, her expression calm. "You look like someone who's seen a ghost," Elena said without looking up. "Maybe I have," Lydia replied. "My grandmother's letter. It changes everything. Damian is family." Elena set her pencil down and sighed. "Ah, life has a cruel sense of humor. I should tell him," Lydia said. "He deserves to know." Elena nodded slowly. "Yes, but be gentle. Truth is a scalpel. It can heal, or it can scar." That afternoon, Lydia called Damian. His voice on the other end was quiet, uncertain. "Lydia, is everything okay?" "I found something," she said. "Something about our grandparents. We need to talk in person." They met at a small cafe downtown, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. It was raining again, soft and steady. Damian arrived first, sitting in a corner booth. No entourage, no pretense. When Lydia walked in, he stood immediately. "You look different," he said. "So do you," she replied. They sat across from each other, two people bound by blood and tragedy neither of them had asked for. Lydia pulled out the letter and slid it across the table. "You should read this." Damian hesitated before unfolding the yellowed paper. As his eyes scanned the words, his breath caught. He read it twice, then a third time, before setting it down with trembling fingers. "She loved him," he said quietly. "She loved my grandfather." "She did," Lydia said. "And she had my mother, which means—" He finished her sentence. "You're my cousin." They both sat in stunned silence. The rain against the windows grew louder. Damian leaned back, rubbing his face. "All this time, I hated you because I thought you were the enemy. But you're the only family I have left." Lydia smiled sadly. "That makes two of us." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Damian said softly, "Do you think she forgave him?" "My grandfather." Lydia looked out the window. "I think she tried. And I think forgiveness isn't something you feel once, it's something you keep choosing." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Then maybe it's time I choose it too." When they left the cafe, the rain had stopped. The clouds had begun to break apart, sunlight spilling over the wet pavement. Damian paused on the sidewalk. "Lydia, thank you for giving me back something I didn't know I'd lost." She smiled faintly. "A name?" He shook his head. "A conscience." They parted ways, the air between them light for the first time in years. And as Lydia walked through the quiet streets, her grandmother's words echoed once more. "Stitch love into everything you touch." For the first time, she understood blood wasn't the curse. It was the thread that bound broken hearts back together. The next few weeks felt like a calm after years of storms. For the first time, Lydia wasn't reacting to chaos. She was creating something new. The Hale Marchand Foundation had expanded beyond scholarships. It now hosted workshops, community programs, and mentorships for young designers across the country. Every wall of the new studio bore her grandmother's quote in bold script. "Grace costs nothing, but it's the finest silk you'll ever wear." One morning, Elena called Lydia into her office. She was sitting by the window, sunlight glowing against her silver hair. "We've been invited to Paris," she said. "Paris?" Lydia blinked. "As in, Paris." "Paris?" Elena smiled. "The Musée de la Mode wants to host an exhibition on legacy and craftsmanship. They want your grandmother's dress and you to represent the American contribution." Lydia's mouth fell open. "Elena, that's huge." "Yes," Elena said softly. "And fitting. It's where she and I first dreamed of the future. Now her granddaughter will carry it forward." When they arrived in Paris 2 months later, the city felt like déjà vu and destiny at once. The museum was breathtaking, arched ceilings, marble floors, and the hum of quiet reverence only art could inspire. Lydia and Elena walked through the exhibition hall, where the lilac gown would stand once again, this time surrounded by couture legends. A young French curator approached them. "Miss Hale," she said with a warm smile, "your grandmother's story, it's become part of our syllabus. She reminds students that art is not born from luxury, but from courage." Lydia felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The night of the gala, the air shimmered with candlelight and conversation in half a dozen languages. Lydia wore a simple black gown. Elena had designed decades earlier. She didn't want to outshine her grandmother's creation, only to honor it. As guests gathered around the lilac dress, Lydia stood beside it, her reflection merging with the glass once more. "You made it back to Paris, Grandma," she whispered. During her speech, Lydia told the story of the gown, not the scandal, not the fall of the Cross family, but the heart behind the stitches. "This dress isn't about fame or power," she said. "It's about the women who worked quietly, who dreamed without permission, who believed beauty could survive betrayal." Applause filled the hall. Elena, seated in the front row, wiped tears from her cheeks. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Lydia, "What's next for you? You've rewritten history, what's left to do?" Lydia thought for a moment. "Maybe it's not about rewriting anymore," she said. "Maybe it's about teaching others to write their own." That night, as they walked back to their hotel along the Seine, Elena slowed her pace. Her breathing was soft, but her steps were weaker than before. Lydia took her arm gently. "I'm fine," Elena said with a smile. "Just tired. My story's almost done, but yours, it's just beginning." Lydia's eyes glistened. "I wouldn't be here without you." Elena squeezed her hand. "No one creates alone. We're all stitches in the same fabric." They stopped on the bridge, the city lights rippling in the water below. The lilac glow of the museum still shimmered in the distance, and as the night air carried the scent of rain and roses, Lydia realized her grandmother's legacy had come full circle, not just restored, but alive in every hand that dared to create with love instead of fear. Paris stayed golden in Lydia's memory long after she returned home. The exhibition was hailed as one of the most moving tributes in decades, and her grandmother's lilac dress became an emblem of integrity and artistry. But, for Lydia, what lingered most wasn't the applause. It was Elena's tired smile that last night by the river. Elena's health had begun to fade. The strong, sharp woman who once commanded runways now spent most of her days in her favorite chair, wrapped in a shawl, sketching slowly just to keep her hands moving. Lydia visited every evening. They would drink tea, watch the sunset spill across the city, and talk about everything except endings. One afternoon, Lydia brought over a large box. "What's this?" Elena asked, eyes curious. "Something I've been working on," Lydia said, lifting the lid. Inside was a new dress, one that shimmered like the dawn, soft pink and silver, elegant but unpretentious. Elena reached out, fingertips trembling as she touched the fabric. "It's beautiful. Whose design?" "Yours," Lydia said with a smile. "You drew it in your notebook months ago. I finished it for you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," Lydia whispered. For a long while, they just sat in silence, the soft hum of life outside fading into the distance. Then Elena spoke, her voice weaker now but still carrying that old command. "When I'm gone, promise me something." "Don't talk like that," Lydia said quickly. "Promise," Elena insisted. "Keep teaching, keep creating. Don't let this story end with us. The world forgets women like Margaret Hale and Elena Marchand unless someone keeps their light alive." Lydia's throat tightened. "I promise." A few weeks later, Elena passed quietly in her sleep. The world mourned a legend, but Lydia mourned a grandmother she'd gained late and lost too soon. The funeral was small and simple, just as Elena had wanted. Lydia wore black gloves and carried a single lilac flower. After everyone left, she stayed behind at the grave. "You once told me every stitch is a heartbeat," she said softly. So I'll keep stitching. I'll keep her heartbeat and yours alive. That night, Lydia returned to the Foundation's studio. The lights were dim, the air still. She sat at the sewing machine her grandmother once used, placed a roll of lilac thread beside it, and began to sew. The sound filled the room steady, rhythmic, like breathing. A knock on the door startled her. She turned to find Damian standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies. "I heard about Elena," he said quietly. "She was remarkable." "She was," Lydia replied, managing a smile. He hesitated. "She taught me something too, you know. The last time we spoke, she said forgiveness isn't weakness, it's proof you've survived." Lydia nodded. She was right. He set the flowers on the table, then looked at the half-finished dress. "It's beautiful. You still using the same fabric?" "Always," she said. "The world changes, but the thread doesn't." He smiled faintly. "That's poetic." They stood there for a long moment, the quiet between them no longer awkward, just human. When he finally left, Lydia returned to the sewing machine. The city outside glimmered through the window. With every stitch, she felt the presence of both women beside her, the one who had dreamed and the one who had endured. And as dawn broke over New York, the lilac thread glowed softly in the light, binding 3 generations together, the dreamer, the fighter, and the keeper of their story stitched forever into the same unbreakable fabric. A year later, the Elena Marchand Foundation hosted its first global showcase in New York. The hall buzzed with quiet anticipation, a blend of elegance and emotion that felt different from every fashion event before it. There were no paparazzi or red carpets, no extravagant displays of wealth. Instead, the stage celebrated simplicity, history, and heart. Lydia stood backstage, her fingers tracing the soft lilac thread embroidered on her sleeve. It was a small detail she had added herself, a tribute, not decoration. Behind her, a row of young designers whispered nervously, clutching the garments they had created through the Foundation's mentorship program. Each one carried a story: loss, courage, reinvention, and Lydia could feel the energy pulsing in the air. "You ready?" a stagehand asked. She smiled faintly. "I think I've been ready my whole life." As the lights dimmed, the show began. It wasn't flashy, it was intimate. Models walked slowly, gracefully, each wearing designs inspired by forgotten artisans, seamstresses, mothers, and grandmothers, whose names never made it to magazine covers. The audience watched in reverent silence. When the final model stepped out, she wore the lilac gown. The gown. It had been carefully restored again, its pearls gleaming under the soft golden light. The crowd collectively exhaled, as if witnessing the return of something sacred. Lydia stepped onto the stage beside the model, her voice trembling slightly as she took the microphone. "This dress was made 70 years ago by my grandmother, Margaret Hale. It survived theft, mockery, and time itself. But what it really survived was silence. And tonight, that silence ends forever." Applause swelled, echoing through the hall. She continued, her voice steadying. "Fashion isn't about perfection. It's about memory. It's about the hands that sewed in dim apartments, the women who worked without credit, and the hearts that refused to give up their stories. This dress doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough." Cameras flashed, but Lydia wasn't thinking about the media or the fame. She thought about her grandmother laughing over a sewing mistake, about Elena scribbling sketches late into the night, about Damian's quiet redemption, about the long road from humiliation to healing. When the applause faded, she stepped forward and placed her hand on the mannequin's shoulder. "This will be the last time this dress walks the runway," she said softly. "From now on, it belongs to the people. It's going on permanent display at the Hale Marchand Center for Design, where students can touch history and remember that greatness doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts at kitchen tables." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Tears glistened on faces across the hall. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Lydia stayed behind, alone with the dress. The air was still, filled with the faint scent of old silk and lavender. She whispered, "You made it all the way, Grandma. Every thread, every dream. You made it." From the corner of the room, Damian's voice broke the quiet. She'd be proud of you, Lydia. She turned and smiled. Maybe, but I think she'd say it's time to rest. He nodded. And what about you? Lydia looked back at the gown, then at the young designers cleaning up backstage. I'm not resting yet. There are still more stories to sew. He smiled, tipping his head. Then keep stitching, Hale. She laughed softly, the sound echoing like music through the empty hall. And as she turned off the final spotlight, the lilac gown glowed faintly in the dark, no longer a relic of pain, but a monument to endurance, love, and the simple truth that beauty stitched in honesty can outlive time itself. So, that's how the story ends. And if you're still here right now, my friend, it means something in this journey touched you somewhere deep inside. Maybe it reminded you of your own battles, those quiet fights no one sees, the ones where you keep your dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. This story isn't just about a dress. It's about truth, forgiveness, and finding peace in what once broke you. The Stoics used to say, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's exactly what Lydia did. She stopped chasing justice out of anger and started living it through grace. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's silent, patient, and stitched one small act of courage at a time. So tonight, wherever you are, take a breath. Remember that what's meant to hurt you can also rebuild you. Beauty isn't born in perfection. It's born in persistence. If this story reached your heart, leave a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that grace can outlast pain. And don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories that remind us how the human spirit, like that lilac dress, never really fades.